I'm Ed Whittingham, and I head up the Pembina Institute. November 22nd, 2015, a nice late fall Sunday. At the Edmonton Science Centre, which is only about 10 blocks away from this building, Premier Notley and Minister Phillips unveil not only the most ambitious climate and energy policy we know of amongst any energy-producing jurisdiction, but it's perhaps the single largest step in addressing climate change, the climate change problem taken by any jurisdiction at any time ever. And there I am. I get to be witness to it all. And my question, the one that still bothers me to this day, is what the hell was I thinking at that particular moment? Lost in thought. My wife Yuka and my kids Beck and Alice, they call it my possum look when I'm there just mulling, contemplating, and snaps, it hits me at the dinner table, and they say, possum, possum. So there I am in my possum moment at this historic moment, and everyone else there, they're looking at it and in rapt attention and enjoying the historic moment. So I have some guesses as to what I was mulling over at the time. Perhaps it was just how much of a game changer the announcement that day was for Alberta. When you think about it, phasing out coal, a 30% renewable electricity target by 2030, a 45% methane reduction target by 2025, a broad-based carbon levy, investments in energy efficiency, an oil sands emissions limit. Just saying it all, it still leaves me breathless. And 6 months after the 2015 election, Alberta went from being a laggard on climate, the international whipping boy, to being amongst the most progressive jurisdictions on the issue in the OECD. And we heard that in spades, those of us who are fortunate enough to be at the Paris Climate Summit the following month. So maybe I was pondering that, or perhaps I was pondering at the composition of the stage. If you look at that, a First Nations chief, prominent oil and gas CEOs, the heads of environmental NGOs, holding hands and singing Kumbaya in support. Figuratively, not literally, but holding hands and supporting the government. How we got to that point of showing that kind of demonstrable support is a topic for another time, but it's an interesting one. What I was actually contemplating, I think, was the multiplier effect that this was going to have, and that how Alberta's actions might influence not just policy in other Canadian jurisdictions, but policy internationally too. And yes, as Minister Phillips said earlier, we are not alone. But with this package, as a jurisdiction, we're actually punching well above our weight. And I think not long ago, it used to be that Alberta prided itself on its parochial approach, doing its own thing. I mean, we remember the bumper stickers of no Kyoto, no weed board, no gun registry. You know, the kind that my neighbor still has on his 20-year-old pickup truck. No matter how much I go out in the middle of the night and try to scrape it off. I mean, the adhesives on those things. Or it reminds me of a story Preston Manning would tell when he was campaigning for the first time in 1988, and he had an aide with him, and they're knocking on doors. Someone opened the door and said, "Listen, I care about the ozone layer. Do you support protecting the ozone layer?" And before Preston had a chance to respond, the aide jumped in and said, "Yes, we support protecting the ozone layer, especially the western half." Well, now that's changing. We're thinking big. We're thinking nationally and internationally, and the actions that Alberta has taken is having influence at both those levels, nationally and internationally. And 3 examples. You take the coal phase-out commitment. Alberta is committed to phasing out coal-fired electricity by 2030. And this is good for the health of Albertans, and it's also good for our pocketbooks. It's going to save us about $300 million a year in healthcare costs. You can't overstate the importance of all OECD countries being off coal as early in the 2030s as possible, both to reduce their own emissions, to tackle climate change, but then also to show the developing world that, yes, you can build out your grids and you don't have to be reliant on dirty coal. So it's doubly important. And the multiplier effect is also double, because domestically, any credible Canadian plan to tackle climate change, and we're in the midst of consultation on one right now, has to have coal phase out as part of its core. It still counts for close to 10% of Canada's overall emissions. but also internationally. At Pembina, we know from our international partners that what Alberta did was huge, and it's noticed. And in essence, it's as simple as this. If Canada's fossil fuel capital can commit to phasing out coal, then surely you can too. And this at a time when countries like Italy and France are thinking of some sort of coal phase-out commitment. So the multiplier effect internationally. The second example, and this is a bit wonkish, but it's methane. And most people don't think much about methane, right? But it's a really important greenhouse gas to reduce. It's a short-term climate forcer, meaning if we reduce emissions now, it has near immediate climate benefit. And like coal, methane, the numbers are big. We're talking about emissions not quite the level of coal in the province, but near to it. And it's a cheap ton to go after as well. If you're an oil and gas producer, it's about changing out valves, some of the most simple forms. And it's a case study in the multiplier effect. Alberta makes this commitment in November 2015. BC follows suit at the beginning of March. The feds announce at the state dinner at the first Obama-Trudeau summit that they too are going to adopt this target, which is a US target. So now we have a harmonized Canada-US approach. And when I talk to Canada's federal environment minister and her counterpart Gina McCarthy, the head of the EPA in the US, they're all confident we're going to bring Mexico on board in June at the North American Leaders Summit. Then we have a harmonized continental approach. And we can use our continental clout to bring the rest of the world on board. And by doing that, again, the numbers are big. It's like scrubbing a third of coal-fired electricity emissions globally off the ledger. And last but not least, the emissions limit, this 100 megaton emissions limit. You know, when it was announced, there were people who were critical of it. Well, it's too high. There are also those who are critical saying it's too low. But the important thing is this is a precedent. And by the way, the folks who stood on that stage that day, we got together not long after, we compared lashes. And a lot of it had to do with that emissions limit because of its importance. And it's a precedent. Because here we have a jurisdiction that's taken a big pool of carbon and has said, all right, this much, no more. And we have certainty around the greenhouse gas footprint of this big pool of carbon. Happens to be the oil sands, the one that caused so much controversy internationally. So this is a precedent that we can use for those other big pools of carbon globally, whether they be coal, gas, or oil. And again, Alberta has the potential to punch well above its weight. So Alberta has gone from being a barrier and a laggard to being a critical piece of the puzzle. And I've also gotten much better at being constantly attentive when I'm standing behind politicians making announcements now. And why? Because I've had some practice, just last Tuesday, standing behind Minister Phillips. So now I can look and I listen with rapt attention. I nod my head at the right time. I can applaud at the right time. I'm a potted plant for hire, provided it's something I support. And I'm optimistic that there's lots going to happen in the next little while that we'll all want to support. And the multiplier effect will continue. And thanks to Alberta, thanks to Minister Phillips, you've given Canada and the world momentum on one of the most important issues facing the world today. Thank you.